Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us here at Cloud Wars Live, where we explore today's digital business revolution by speaking with business executives and thought leaders who are profoundly changing how the world works, lives, plays, learns, and dreams. Our guest today is Dion Hinchcliffe, one of my favorite, in fact, he is my number one favorite analyst and strategist exploring the remarkable and sometimes mystifying intersection of business and technology. A big-time thinker, futurist, and writer, Dion is VP and Principal Analyst at Constellation Research. Dion, welcome to the Cloud Wars Live podcast. Thanks very much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Dion, your writing and your outlook on the business technology sector I find to be quite unique. Some analysts, I think, believe that business was invented to worship enterprise technology. And I think there's others that just don't really fully understand the technology side of it to be able to bring a balanced approach. So I'd just like to ask, what's behind the intertwined perspectives that you always offer, which gives enough sort of depth into the tech side, but while also providing that perspective that shows it's the business outcomes that really matter? How did you come up with that unique blend?
Well, I've been very fortunate in my career. I did start out on the technology side. I've been, and still am, a practicing enterprise architect. Always had that big picture view, trying to understand all the key moving parts. But at that level, you also have to understand how all of it connects to the function of the business itself. So I've had stints in auto insurance, finance, even defense, and all of those are really focused industries where I had a chance early on to work with CIOs. We're really trying to move the needle for the business, but using technology. And that's always been, the IT business divide has been one of the most challenging ongoing discussions in our industry for decades. And it's getting better, but we still have a ways to go. But, I put one foot on each side. We have got to connect those two worlds for all this to mean something.
So to Dan, in that context, in July of this year, you and your colleagues at Constellation Research created a new list, innovative leaders, called the Business Transformation 150. And when that list was announced, right, you offered a compelling quote about what's going on in the business world today. So I'd just like to quickly read an excerpt of that quote from you, and then ask you to tell us a little bit about, what the thinking behind that, and then also about your Business Transformation 150. And here's the quote: "Digital change continues to dominate the agenda of the global C-suite in what is proving to be a growth market despite the challenges of major new disruptive technologies. This year's BT 150 reflects the best and brightest senior leaders grappling with those advances while building a strong foundation for transformative futures." So, Dion, today there's and you certainly touched on it there's a lot of competing and potentially conflicting dynamics at play in the C-suite. So what makes the execs on your BT 150 list stand out?
The next generation digital leader called the new C-suite. And I've written about it a number of times. And, there's a post out there that talks about the mindset of this type of leader. And it's much more of a growth mindset than we had in the past with IT, which, IT's been considered a support function, right? A cost center. It doesn't actually drive the business. But most of the BT 150 are very much think the opposite, that IT is becoming the business. Most organizations are becoming primarily technology companies. The user experience is where the value is created. And so we see this broad switch. And so the inductees to the BT 150 had to have done something recently to really drive forward kind of that growth mindset. They had to be working with emerging technologies in some significant way and have had a recent achievement. And so to the extent that we could, we tried to talk to every single one of them. And we think most of them are really excellent poster children for that.
Yeah, Dion, I think I certainly felt that connection there, because there were some years in the past, going back a handful of years, where I would continue to be just extremely frustrated. You'd be talking to CIOs, and they're really sharp, they got a lot of things, but then they'd inevitably come up with a line that, if not exactly these words, very close to say, the job of, my job and the IT team's job is to support the business. And I just wanted to scream, because right there you're saying IT is not part of the business, right? It's separate. Yeah. So like you said, and we know what happens at cost centers, these days. So I congratulate you and your colleagues for sort of pushing forward and maybe pounding some final nails into those coffins, where certainly CIOs and entire IT organizations, the culture and the mindset has to be one where intimately involved in the business, and you're not immune from things like revenue and growth and customers and market shifts and moves forward there. It just seems so essential these days. So are you optimistic about the pace at which companies at large or industries at large are moving in the right direction?
So I think things are getting better, but the data isn't good, right?
Yeah.
We have these variety of challenges. One, large-scale initiatives have about the same failure rate as they did 30 years ago, right? So we're not learning something there, right? It's hard. The latest Harvard Business Review data says 77% of large initiatives fail. Either they significantly underperform, or they go way over budget, or are way late, right? And this is why big bang projects are out of favor. Most people break them up into a portfolio of things that they do that are more loosely connected, that can live and die on their own, and that seems to work. It does work much better. And then you have the other really disturbing data that most of the companies that were on the S&P 500 or in the Fortune 500 from the year 2000 are gone. Most of them are over 60% are gone. And the primary reason, according to the MIT Technology Review, is failure to adapt to technology change.
Yeah.
So that's your Blockbuster, Barnes & Noble, and RIM, and all those organizations that didn't see the writing on the wall fast enough and couldn't change quickly enough, right? And that's a real challenge. And then you have the others. I visit a lot of organizations every year, Bob, and I see the IT department still in their own building, right, or have their own floor, right? This is very pattern. There's a real pride in some of that sometimes too, right? Where we get technology, we're the high priests, and that's what we do, and we're over here, and we're not going to give them the messy parts of the business. And that I see starting to break up a little bit is the good news. I'm seeing more matrixing of business and IT people, the growth of IT, what are called business IT liaison roles in organizations that says, oh, we're actually going to have to put some of our people out into the business. All those are encouraging, but the problem is things are changing faster outside or most organizations than inside, and that's untenable.
So, Dion, along those lines, a sort of two-part question here. What do you think are the biggest issue or two that C-level execs should be focusing on today? And then second, do you find that there's a very serious issue that still in that C-suite, it's just not getting nearly the attention it deserves?
Yeah, and then the data has shown, I'm a very database guy. I want to try, we have so many folks in the BT 150 now, this allows us to get real data points that actually something. So where is this going? What patterns do we see? And I think if you're talking about the C-suite, there's two things that need to be done. One is the Dr. Heal Thyself type of thing. The boards and the C-suite are not digitally experienced enough. And they just don't put enough time into it. It's not, as you said, a priority. If you look at a CEO's typical top 10 priorities, at least in 2018, and finally digital transformation made the list, and there might be customer experience on that list. But you'd be surprised. A lot of it is, how do I deal with, global regulatory change? That's much more likely to be at the top, right? Or customer privacy, which is good, and it does involve technology, but it's not going to drive the business forward, right? And it's not going to sustain it. So so you have these challenges, and so what we've been kicking around a lot is, what does it take? How do we get to digitally qualified executives, in these roles so that they're putting the right attention? So that has to be done. The boards and the C-suite have to look inward and address the experience and qualification issue around digital. And then the other challenge is successfully steering a very large organization and driving the education and skills and the culture into the organization around what it takes to be a digital organization to drive that growth. It's more of a people problem than a technology problem. There's a lot of skill building, a lot of education. You can deploy all the technology you want across the organization and say, all right, let's build our business around it, but the skills aren't there. So that's the other piece that really has to be done, has to be addressed.
All right, let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. Today's show is brought to you by SAP. SAP is a technology company that's helping organizations do great things. When you use SAP to transform your business, it's not just great for shareholders and employees, it's great for everybody. Because businesses that run better can help build communities, protect the environment, and improve the lives of people everywhere. It's true, the best run businesses make the world run better, and the best run SAP. Okay, back to the show. Well, Dion, that's interesting. And I know that hooks back to a comment you had made earlier, right? That IT organizations need to be more focused on, the business overall, growth, customers, talent. So this talent and skills point there as well. What do you advise companies, right? How should they approach this talent and skills issue that you've brought up a couple times now.
Yeah, and great talent is what's going to drive this forward. So if you look at, the big tech companies that are a second hair out of the room, the Googles, the Amazons, and so on, they're hiring the very, very best people that they can, right? So the number one folks in any given category, that's what they're going after. And so that's a tall challenge for most organizations to match it. And additional learning isn't going to do it. For example, there's negative employment in software development and cybersecurity and other fields. Negative employment.
Yeah.
So there isn't anyone else, right? So we need to do a lot more upskilling inside of our organizations. Great as we have these amazing digital tools for learning now, right? So there's online learning platforms that are much more self-paced, self-service, often underpinned by a community, massively open online courses, for example, have been growing in leaps and bounds. It's a huge industry, and most people are not even paying attention to it. Corporate learning, and this is where HR has really not served the organization well when it comes to digital, has not rolling these out in mass to drive the educational change and skill building in our organizations. If you look at the pace of Amazon's cloud development, if you were following all the things that happened at reInvent, that the foundation of all this stuff is changing much faster than our organizations are able to adapt it, right? But some organizations, if you look at startups, they're wiring this stuff in almost as fast as it comes out, right? And that, so we know it can be done, but most aren't doing it. They're just not organized very well.
So, Dion, that touches on some too. I think just a related point. I do think it's funny sometimes today hearing companies talk about it's almost language from 20 years ago and sort of the classical, on-premise enterprise software type of thing, that somehow finance, HR, that these are back office. And I just think that's such an anachronism these days. And as you describe it here, companies are never going to be able to fulfill their strategies, fulfill their potential if they don't regard things like talent as absolute top-line priority. Does the data tell you anything about the pace at which companies are recognizing more clearly the importance of a more aggressive posture toward talent?
We don't have good data on that. And that's a tough one when I'm on an issue I'll be working on in 2019, because the CEO of GE, famous one, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, he has a famous saying, when the rate of change outside your organization is much greater than what's inside, the end is near. And my gut tells me that, most organizations are actually aging out of being competitive, right? They're not offering the services that the market would expect. I look at what Elon Musk is doing with the Tesla platform from a software perspective, and iterating it so quickly and putting in so many innovative ideas on a weekly basis, practically, and just demonstrating to a hidebound industry what's possible when you treat your industry like the high-tech industry it should be, right? So what I do have, I did a survey of 50 top CIOs last year, and basically said, what are you really facing? And 94% of them said they're either under strong or very strong pressure to move much more quickly. And so we're seeing that the data is showing that the urgency is being pushed down onto the shoulders of IT leaders. It's just that they're not able to deliver. They don't have the talent. For the most part, some do, but most of them don't have the talent to be able to move this agenda forward and go faster.
So, Dion, that's you see this like in studies of history, right, and in how things happen. The awareness is there of a need for change. The capabilities aren't necessarily there, and as you point out, on the one hand, you've got startups are showing a capability to do this sort of thing. You've got these mega companies. They're able to go out and attract the best talent and weave this sort of, incredibly rapid, relentless innovation into what they do. And I don't mean to just keep coming back to this, but what can those companies in the middle do? Is this a cultural thing? Is it a leadership thing? Where do they get started to get back on the right track?
Well, I mean, I think it's worth revisiting, because in my practice, I've spent a lot of time trying to find out what's the patterns for success. When people are doing it, what are they doing? What's working. And so I use an example. There's two ways to solve this problem. One, you can try to staff your way into it. So, for example, when General Motors decided that they realized that mobile devices are going to be an integral part of the ownership experience for cars, they said, we have to be mobile. Our experience has to have all the right mobile applications and mobile experiences that people are coming to expect, right? To be able to track their cars and have a relationship with it, and order up maintenance and start their car remotely, and all the things that we see now, right? So they hired 8,000 mobile developers. right? So they tried it the hard way, right? So this is the approach I call it, doing it all yourself. And contrast this with a lot of other very successful companies. When I tend to look at an organization that's doing much better, they're not trying to do it all themselves, right? They may not try and staff all the way in, because most organizations don't have the resources to staff in. For one thing, those people don't even exist anymore. They've been taken off the market, right?
Yeah.
And second of all, it's very expensive to do it that way, and slow, right? To build, absorbing 8,000 people, getting them all directed, that can take a year or more, years or more, right? So what a lot of organizations have been doing is platforming their business, building an ecosystem of partners around it, and saying, hey, I don't have to do it all myself. So, if you look at the App Exchange or the Apple App Store, the amount of economic revenue flowing through those things is enormous. And Apple could say, not only does this device do everything that we build into it, but there's almost 1 million developers adding to it all the time, right? And Apple gets revenue whether they build the feature or their partners build the feature.
Yeah.
And we see this, and so we see this model, as being much more successful. And so the question is, can regular organizations do it? Because both of those are very high-performing organizations, which, again, you see the high-performing organizations doing this thing over and over again, whereas the other old companies don't even think this way. And now you have using other people's ingenuity, time, and resources to build on for your business these things and doing it very, very quickly, right? This is very successful now. I've since repeated that around the world. It's a repeatable process, right?
Yes.
Facebook has famously used hackathons to develop new features for what they're doing. So these are the types of really targeted activities. Are lightweight, very high velocity, very effective, and saying, I don't have to do it myself. I can spread out the risk, the cost, and cast a wider net for innovation. These things are working. And I have many other case examples I'm assembling for my next book, which is going to be about this topic. What's really working? What are the patterns for success for digital transformation? And that's
it sounds like a good one. Dion, I know, what you had mentioned a couple of years ago. I had an opportunity. I spoke with a gentleman who is the CIO for Hong Kong, and one of the things he said was that the government of Hong Kong had become very good at collecting data, and he chuckled and he said we're terrible at doing anything with it. So he said when he came into, one of the things he said that the traffic, the congestion on that tiny island with the unbelievable construction, it's been terrible. He said, let's just put some data out. He said, release some of it publicly or make it available to the public. And he said within, I think it was 48 hours, again, like, those numbers, close to 100 different applications that, entrepreneurs or developers just saw that, put it out. He said it was zero cost. He said, we thought maybe you'd get one or two. So that is a powerful lesson, but there's something in the culture of big companies, right? Like you mentioned the GM example.
Not invented here. There's a phrase for it. Yeah, exactly.
We got to own it. It has to be ours. But it's a different place now, right? Is it that the need for speed and velocity, as you described it, sort of overwhelms the notion of it's got to be invented here?
Well, if you try and do it all yourself, you'll fall behind. That's the message, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Dion, I wanted to ask you one last thing here before we wrap up. Are there any of the top cloud vendors doing some things, either along the lines of what we've discussed or differently, that you find to be particularly strategic right now that are going to help separate them from the pack? Yeah,
it's interesting. So obviously, being highly consumable, very, very easy to use. We're seeing all the cloud vendors trying to improve the consumability, the usability, the manageability especially, right? But we're seeing some interesting differentiators, attempts to really kind of push out and say, can we rethink the computing part of cloud computing so that it's, we can achieve order of magnitude cost reductions or order of magnitude performance increases for the same kind of cost. And so right now I'm watching with considerable interest the use of both GPUs and FPGAs to basically break Moore's law, right? Saying that what we're going to do is in the same server space, we're going to put 100 times more power, 500 times more power for the same cost or less, even like in the case of FPGAs, right? So that's been interesting. That's going to, there's a lot of debate about quantum computing and whether that's going to really be a big player in cloud. And I think it will eventually, but much longer time horizons. But the concern is that it will unleash enough computing power to make all of our existing cybersecurity methods inadequate, right? So we can break encryption and things like that. That's actually going to happen with these advances, right? Massively parallel, throwing thousands of cores in the server, which is what the numbers we're heading to. instead of having just the 4 to 8 threads we have now on a server, we can have thousands of them.
Yeah,
and for about in the same order of magnitude in terms of price. And so that is that kind of experimentation. I don't see people tracking that. I'm like, we're about to see the available compute power just drop towards zero while the capacity heads to the sky, right? And I'm watching that, and so I predict that's as we get better at developing software for these, because that's the problem. You can't just recompile your code. You have to rewrite the code for these capabilities. Those that are willing to do that are going to reap tremendous competitive advantage because they can do the same thing for 1/10 to 1/100th the cost, right?
Dion, based on what you just said there, let me just real quick. Are you a tech optimist?
I am. I'm unfortunately less of a tech optimist because now we see that become so pervasive that bad actors are actually trying to figure out how to misuse it, right? So it used to be a great business to be in because everyone was working towards positive outcomes, and now there's some that are not, and that's discouraging. But overall, I'm a tech optimist.
All right. Well, Dion, this has been a terrific conversation. Thanks so much for your time and insights.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you having me on the show.
And many thanks to all of you listeners for joining us here on Cloud Wars Live, where we explore the unfolding adventures of digital business and digital life and how those are profoundly changing how we work, play, learn, and experience the world. I hope you'll join us for other episodes of Cloud Wars Live, and please share your feedback with me at bobevanspa@gmail.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.